brain comes equipped with many incredible tools to ensure our survival in times of deep distress. So far, we've talked about 4: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And now we're going to move into the first D, which is dissociation. In this video, I want to be very clear that I'm talking about dissociation as it is tied to trauma and PTSD. And in this video, we are not going to be diving into DID, depersonalization, derealization disorder, dissociative fugue, and other experiences. This is all about how our mind and our body use dissociation to help us survive a traumatic encoding, and how dissociation might continue to show up in our life as an ongoing process. And first, let me say this. Dissociation is a normal part of everyday life. Our brain is very expensive to manage and to run energetically. And therefore, dissociation is a way that our brain functions in an autopilot state to help us survive so that it doesn't have to reinterpret and resynthesize all of the incredible data that we witness every single day. There's billions and billions of data bytes coming at us all of the time. And if you've ever driven to work and then turned around and been like, whoa, how did I get here? That's dissociation. Autopilot is a form of dissociation, so it's normal. In trauma, dissociation ups the ante. It's a way that our mind separates us from a stimuli or an experience that is so intense that our brain and our body actually think we're going to die. Dissociation is one of the 2 Ds, the other is defensive rage, that are the final acts of survival. When our brain goes into a dissociative state, it's also called a thanatosis state. We're playing dead. And dead for a human looks very, very different than it would for an animal. If you've ever seen a possum in a freeze state, it just kind of falls over, or those fainting goat videos on YouTube, that's dissociation. That's what most mammals do. They freeze, and guess what? If they survive, they actually have a tremor response or a trauma shaking experience that comes afterwards. In order to go into dissociation, our system has to have such a high level of norepinephrine as well as other stress chemicals that it knocks itself out. And then when we come to, the system needs to release all that stuff, like, ugh, get rid of it. But humans have been socialized out of, or at least that's the hypothesis, that tremor trauma release experience. And so instead, our system encodes and carries it forward. That's actually why there's a method of healing called the trauma tremor that can be really healing. So when we've had that type of experience and then we come back into the real world, our brain has learned that dissociating works. And what do we know about our brain? It loves what works. It is very open to learning survival patterns and prioritizing them. And so if we've had one survival or threat-induced dissociative experience, our brain is much more likely to do that again and again and again and again. And I can attest to this in my own healing journey. I used to dissociate quite a bit as a child, an adolescent, and a teen, given some complicated things going on in my world. And then I did a ton of trauma work, hadn't dissociated in an exceptionally long time. And just a couple months ago, for the first time in probably over 2 decades, I had an experience where I dissociated. And I felt it. I left my body, that depersonalized experience. And I was like, whoa, this is happening. High five, brain, you're keeping me safe. And of course, I was interacting with a stimulus that has been a threat to my life in the past. Good data. My brain, high five, was still keeping me safe. So dissociation is exactly that. It is a survival tool. It is a modality that our brain and our body learns to keep us safe. Interesting data point. When we dissociate, neurobiologically, we actually see decreased activation in our little friend Amy the Amygdala. Remember how she's always working to keep us safe? In a moment of dissociation, it's as though her resources are so overwhelmed and taxed that the rest of our brain goes, hey, Amy, we've got this. It's okay. And all that energy gets redirected, flatline. And so the symptoms of dissociation can feel like what I just described. We depersonalize. We feel as though we're floating outside ourselves because, man, we don't want to be in here when that death blow comes. It can feel as though the world stops feeling real around us, as though we're living in a cartoon land, or it's fuzzy or hazy. It can also feel as though we are simply disconnected and numb. And in extreme forms, we get into those other disorders that I mentioned, DID, depersonalization and derealization disorder, dissociative fugue, where our system literally shifts and this becomes our new way of life. The good news, of course, is healing is possible. And if you're noticing that you're dissociating, there's a couple really cool, easy tricks that you can do. The primary one is we actually want to get our amygdala back online. She's critical. And remember, Amy speaks the language of those 5 senses: seeing, smelling, hearing, tasting, touching. And so if we can shock her back into place, our dissociation might step back or even go away. Great ways to do that: ice cubes, really, really, really shockingly sour candy. So do you remember those Warheads? They still make them. I checked. Warheads are great to keep on hand if you notice that you dissociate. Biting into a lemon is a really good one. Even dunking your head into ice cold water is a wonderful way to help yourself come back into the moment and go, whoa. And when you come to, apply that CPR for the amygdala when you're back grounded and present enough, because this is a threat response. Your brain has encoded it, and CPR for the amygdala is our go-to for softening and even removing those old trauma responses. Because guess what? If you don't need them today, your brain's still doing them because it thinks it does, and CPR for the amygdala disrupts that information processing pattern. You hold the power for healing in your own hands.